Squires, a native West Virginian author, and Lynne Squires is a fiction crafter, occasional poet, blogger, and magazine columnist. Beginning her writing journey, Squires published her memoir, Letters to My Son, Reflections of Urban Appalachia at Mid-Century. The book presents a different perspective into perhaps the most mislabeled population in America, urban Appalachians. Along with her other books, her work has appeared in numerous anthologies and journals, including the 2018 anthology of the Appalachian writers. Her blog, The View from My Cup, features reflective little musings that remind us that every cup has a story. Occasionally, a great author will drop by and share their view from their cup as well. For over 3 years, Lynne has been a featured columnist for Charleston Home and Living magazine. Her column, Looking Back, visits homes, building, landmarks, and areas of Charleston, West Virginia. Squires currently represents the literary arts of the West Virginia Tamarack Artisan Board. She's a past treasurer and newsletter editor for West Virginia Writers Incorporated, and she is a former reviewer on the West Virginia book team for the Charleston Gazette-Mail, where she reviewed books by West Virginia authors. She regularly teaches workshops on social media for writers, building a platform, and marketing.
Thank you very much. God, that sounded important.
It did.
My talk today is on urban Appalachia. If you look up urban Appalachian in Google, if you Google it, it actually refers to people that are from Appalachia that have moved outside of Appalachia and formed their own little conclaves. But the secondary meaning to that would be people in Appalachia that don't live in rural areas. So thus urban Appalachians. So that's what I'm talking about today, not people that are in Cleveland or Cincinnati or whatnot. So which really is Appalachia if you think about it? Is it the hills and hollows that people tend to think about all up and down the Appalachian corridor? Or is it concrete jungles in the cities that are planted within Appalachia? If you define Appalachia, it's about a 205,000 square mile area. It includes all of West Virginia and parts of 12 other states. Includes 420 counties in 13 states and a population of 25 million people. Just for a little comparison, California has a population of about 40 million people. So all of that area doesn't even add up to how many people are in California. Just for a little perspective on that. Rural and urban Appalachia are basically different sides of the same coin. The top part of Appalachia right now, about the top 2/3 of it, has been declining in population over the last several years. A lot of that is because a lot of people our age and older are moving south because it's warmer down there, and who wants to be in the snow if you don't absolutely have to? And a lot of it is job opportunities. We lose young people for job opportunities that are farther south. And then, of course, attrition, because we're an aging population and we die and we're not being replaced, one for one. So there's a lot of reasons for that. On one side of the coin, though, hillbillies, as we're called, or Appalachians, are often described as individuals who are thought of as backward, awkward, undereducated, sometimes violent, and resist modernization. If you go back to the middle of the last century, after the war and such, there was big migration westward. There was a lot of factories springing up and whatnot, but especially in this area, we were still mining coal, we were still cutting down trees, we were still doing the same things we've been doing for a lot of years. So, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, hilly area doesn't lend itself well to having a big chemical plant or something built in the middle of it or any other kind of thing. So, but because of that, people tended to think Appalachian people stayed a little more backward, not as forward thinking about things. The flip side of the coin, our self-identification as Appalachians covers a lot of stuff. We have a love and respect of nature. Obviously, we live in a beautiful area. Strong work ethics, being independent, being self-reliant, being generous to our neighbors. And I don't know anybody that's traveled that's not heard people say, "You all are so friendly there. This is such a friendly state." Being resilient and embracing a down-to-earth type lifestyle. Hillbilly and all the negative connotations that go with it, though, is a part of our identity in Appalachia, and people fight against that. But you have to ask yourself, what brought that on in the first place? What encouraged that stereotype? This is probably a little, I don't know if you can see that or not, but folklore and stories, Hatfields and McCoys obviously being the first big one that springs to mind. People talking about moonshine and how we did all the illegal stuff and ran moonshine and stills up in the woods and that sort of thing. TV and movies, the Beverly Hillbillies, I don't even think they really were actually from Appalachia. They were farther over in Tennessee where they left from, but that put, a big swipe on our palette of what it looks like to be painted as an Appalachian. Deliverance, the movie Deliverance, obviously, was filmed actually in Georgia, not really in Appalachia per se. But I think in the movie it was supposed to be in maybe Tennessee or wherever it was they were supposed to be, theoretically. Hee Haw, you all remember the Hee Haw show? You're probably too young for that, but.
Oh, I'm aware.
But it was all about making money off of the backs of people that, had families that lived that basically. Jeff Foxworthy, a more current person, that being a redneck, which is kind of a modern day term for hillbilly, really. The series on TV Justified, I don't know if any of you watch that or not. It's based in Kentucky, and a lot of the backwoods families still doing illegal stuff, although not so much moonshine. Now they've moved up to like oxycodone and things like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, still running around with that same mentality, families that were running businesses, from the back of their cabins and that sort of stuff. But there have been plenty of industries that have jumped on the backs of Appalachian culture and are making a dime off of it, and they've really proliferated the feeling about what Appalachian is all about. Perhaps it seems logical to conclude that people living in the largest geographical areas were a fair representation of life in all of Appalachia. I mean, you would think this is what we think about with Appalachia. Everybody in Appalachia must be like this. They all have outhouses. They all tote a gun to school. They hunt every Saturday, whatever your perception is. But the truth of the matter is 48% or 42% of the Appalachian area is rural, and 58% is actually urban. A lot of people are surprised by that because when you think Appalachia, you don't think urban areas at all. You think rural areas. All this stuff that I lived in Cincinnati for a while, and there were a lot of Appalachian people. And of course, they're kind of on the edge of Appalachia over there, but they're not. They would ask stuff like, did you have to walk to school, and did you have shoes, and did you have to carry a lunchbox, and all those typical things. And I always tell people if they ever visited my closet, they'll know that we have plenty of shoes here. We're good on shoes. So, but that's the kind of thing you're constantly fighting against, even though most of us did not live in that situation. I wanted to read a little bit out of my book here. I may have gotten ahead of myself, but oh well. This is actually a book I wrote, Letters to My Son, Reflections of Urban Appalachia in Mid-Century. Each chapter is about a different topic, school, shopping, clothes, gardening, that kind of thing. And each chapter starts with a little letter to my son telling him about what it would be like, perhaps would be like if we had lived in rural Appalachia, but because we both grew up, or he was growing up at the time in urban Appalachia, what my experience with that was. This is from the introduction. In my mid-30s, I worked with a couple dozen folks of generally my same age. One day, during a very random conversation, much to my surprise, I learned that I was the only one among us who had grown up always having indoor plumbing. I was stunned at the revelation, and yet at the same time, I had an epiphany of sorts. There was a distinct and decided difference between growing up in urban and rural Appalachia. Why a book about the distinction between the two? Because so many of the stereotypes surrounding Appalachia don't hold true if you were raised in urban areas. Say the word Appalachia to just about anyone, and visions of dusty bare feet, axe-chopped wood piles, tractors, and chickens roaming the yard come to mind. And hillbillies, often nearly toothless in the mind's eye, wear denim, carry metal lunchboxes to jobs in the mines, or to the one-room schoolhouse. In our front yard, my grandmother didn't wring the necks of chickens she was preparing to behead in preparation for Sunday dinner, nor did we gather eggs each morning from a hen house. The assortment of animals we care for ran the gamut from cat to dog. We didn't use a wringer washer, cook over an outdoor fire to make apple butter, or store vegetables in a root cellar. We didn't even have a root cellar, and it was years before I ever saw one. To this day, I'm fairly certain I've never been in one. But let's be clear, there isn't a thing in the world wrong with any of those things associated with rural Appalachia. They are all part of the heritage of anyone raised in the hills and mountains of the region, but they are not necessarily the part of the Appalachian city dwellers' experience. Come on here. I hate when these things don't cooperate. There we go. This I'm pretty sure you can't see, but this is a comparison of different size cities in Appalachia compared to the rest of the United States. And there is not one really large city anywhere in Appalachia. Atlanta almost gets there. It's like right underneath Appalachia, but it's not there. It's a little over 100 miles away. But just for example, some of these, Charleston, the city itself, 47,000. The greater metropolitan area, 211,000. And that would include like the Teays Valley area, outlying areas around there. Pittsburgh is the biggest city in Appalachia. The city proper, 301,000. And the greater Pittsburgh area is over 2 million people. So that's a pretty significant sized city. But for comparison, Atlanta, which is close to Appalachia, 496,000 in the city proper, and 2.2 million in their greater Atlanta area. So that's considerably larger than even Pittsburgh is. If you go clear up to like Houston, Texas, 2 million people in the city proper. And in the greater Houston area, 6.9 million people. So there is a decided difference in the population size, but still, 365,000 people in a greater metropolitan area, nothing to sneeze at. That's still a pretty significant area. Let's see here. The road goes both ways, though. If you think about if you grew up in rural Appalachia, you ventured out occasionally. You went shopping someplace. This is a little different for your age group because, box stores were everywhere, McDonald's were everywhere pretty much. When I was growing up, that wasn't the case necessarily. My grandparents lived in Buchanan, which is not a small town really, but they would come to bigger towns to shop, Clarksburg maybe to shop. I lived in St. Albans growing up, and while that's a suburb of an urban area, Charleston, we would go to Charleston to shop and whatnot. But then you flip that point around, and when we went to visit family, we would go into rural areas. So it's not like you never had that experience. Rural people were passing us on the highway as we were passing them going that direction. So there's really kind of a blending of that in this area. It's not like the line is hard, drawn in the sand. When I wrote this book, of course, you can buy it on Amazon. On Amazon, people will log on and rate your book and tell you what they think about it. And this was, my first book, and I was devastated because this woman leaves this huge, long comment that it wasn't horrible, and clearly she had read the book, but it wasn't all that favorable. So this is a couple of things she said. I gained no insights at all into urban Appalachia in the mid-century. I don't know how living in Charleston, West Virginia, or Knoxville, Tennessee in 1955 or 1970 was different from living in Tucson, Arizona, or Killington, Vermont. Well, first of all, Killington, Vermont is tiny. It has like less than 1,000 people who live there. But at first, this just crushed me. And I thought, really, she's making my point for me, because living in urban Appalachia is not different than living any place else in the United States. We shopped, we ate, we went to the movies, and whatnot. So I had to rethink how I felt about that. I still wasn't thrilled. She gave me a 2.
Yeah.
But, it was one of the first reviews I ever got. I'm like, oh my God, I'm never going to read a review again. But I want to read a little bit to you about shopping. This is from the letter part at the beginning of the chapter. Dear Duncan, shopping in my youth was far different than it would have been had I grown up in rural Appalachia. We shopped in large department stores or smaller specialty shops. We even traveled to other cities to visit stores that carried different fare than our usual stores. Even though my mother occasionally made me a dress or skirt or blouse, that was the exception rather than the rule. Rural Appalachian shopping often consisted of ordering from a Sears and Roebuck catalog or shopping in a local store with a very limited selection of garments. The majority of clothes for ladies, and in some measure men's as well, were handmade, whether by hand sewing or sewing machine. Skip over here, talk about one of my favorite stores we shopped at. Purchases in hand, we crossed the street to Stone & Thomas. This store had a mezzanine that overlooked the first floor and was fascinating to me. The china department was located there, and my love for tableware took flight amid the paper-thin bone china, shimmering crystal, and smooth sterling silver. I added names to my vocabulary like Reed and Barton, Cambridge, and Waterford. Needless to say, stern admonitions of "do not touch" were uttered each and every time before we ascended the staircase to this wonderland where the well-appointed table owners shopped. The staircase served all the many floors of the store, but other than going to the mezzanine, we always took the elevator. After pushing the button, the door slid open, revealing a woman seated on a tiny fold-out stool in front of the control panel. She would inquire to which floor we were intending to visit, and then, pushing her various buttons, made it so. Always polite, always friendly, the elevator ladies heralded your arrival at your destination by announcing the floor on which you had arrived, even though everyone in the elevator could and did watch the indicator dial. So that's just kind of, my experience as a kid shopping. Obviously, we weren't ordered straight up from the Sears Roebuck every time. Another comment from that lady's letter was, her Christmas recollections are charming, but could have occurred any place in the United States. Duh. That's kind of the point. All of her observations are true, but any baby boomer from any part of the U.S. could have written this about wherever they grew up. So again, she's, that kind of served to make the whole point of what I was trying to get across with the book, is that urban Appalachia was different because we didn't have that same flavor of people that grew up in a rural area. When I went to college, one of my very best friends my first year of college actually works here at this school, and I won't say who she is, but she grew up in Crum, and I'd never been to Crum before, and I'm not even sure I'd ever heard about it necessarily. When Buffalo Creek happened, I was still fairly young. I'm obviously old enough to know what was going on, but when you're a teenager, you're getting ready to go to college, high school and all that, it's kind of like, that's a horrible thing to have happened, but I wasn't really tuned into what all that meant, and I'd certainly never been here. So one day we decided we're going to ride to her mom's house to visit, and we had to go up a logging road to get there, and I didn't even know you drove on like regular cars on those things. I'd never seen a logging road before. It had like these big serious ruts in the road, and obviously dirt all the way up, and she was telling me stories about when the flood came, and the neighbors at the bottom of the hill, their house flooded so deep, their piano floated out of their house onto the yard. And she's telling me these stories, and I was just like, oh my God, that was unreal to me. I couldn't imagine anything like that happening. Of course, I grew up on a hill, which helped, we didn't ever flood, but then we went to her mother's home, and lovely people. She cooked dinner for us. It was really good, but they had like chickens roaming around the front yard. And I was just like, wow, this is, I never experienced that before. So that's kind of like my first real experience with how the other half lived, basically. Her coming to Huntington to go to the university was, she had shared with me, was just really an eye-opener for her to be living in a town like that where there were restaurants on every corner and that sort of thing. So we were kind of like two total opposites as far as how we lived. In closing, I just wanted to read another little section from the book, from the end of it. If I can find where it was. Okay. Urban Appalachia life at mid-century was not the same as that of rural Appalachian dwellers. Perhaps it seems logical to conclude that people living in the largest geographical areas were a fair representation of life in all of Appalachia, but that was unfair and an inaccurate assessment. Long before the world was considered to be a global village with a box store and fast food eatery on every corner, urban Appalachia held its own in forward progress. Department stores, music, vacation destinations kept pace with the balance of the nation. At the same time, some traditions remained reminiscent of generations past. Decoration Day, family reunions, holiday celebrations, and such harkened back to practices held by both rural kin and long-gone ancestors. Rural and urban Appalachia are different sides of the same coin. Why a volume of letters to my son about urban Appalachia? Because I want him to understand the Appalachia of his mother and his grandparents, to know his roots are in the mountains, but he is not defined by those stereotypes, to understand different parts make a whole, and to know while often overshadowed by the rural identity, the urban Appalachian experience was no less viable. That probably didn't take any time at all to talk about that, but do y'all have any questions?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, Buffalo Creek incident. What was that?
Buffalo Creek was dammed at the top of it by a coal company to make a slag pile, you know, where their runoff and stuff from the coal mine filled it up. And even though they'd been warned about rising water when it rained too much and not having proper runoffs, because, you know, some of it's supposed to kind of like a big leach field leaches into the surrounding area, wasn't really taken care of properly. And after a really, really, really bad rain, it flooded the entire valley. I think there were something like 12 communities and thousands, I don't know how many exactly, but probably 1,200 or so people were killed instantly, practically. Yeah, it was just, I've read some books about it. It's just, I can't even imagine it, but it started the whole trend in the United States of being able to have lawsuits against corporations that weren't doing what they should have been doing. And they liked to never even got it to trial, because they, back then the basis of being able to pay damages to somebody was if you were, like if you had been in the water, you know, if you were washed down the river, and I'm sure there were probably some people that lived, or down the creek, most obviously didn't, but if you had been in the water or if your home had been washed away, but some of the people wouldn't, like children, they don't own a home, you know, they lived in one, but it wasn't their home, and the people either died or they climbed to safety up the side of the hill, so they didn't fit the criteria of having ever been in the water. So they really fought against this, and they took it to court and ended up winning, but it established the use of, what is that called, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, because that was not something that was ever a viable argument, that there wasn't even such a thing. In fact, they called it something else back then, but that's what it actually was, and eventually it turned into that. But, you know, they were fighting for people to recover damages, not only for their home, but the suffering that they incurred because of that. I mean, interviewing, you know, hundreds of people afterwards, every single person was just changed forever. I mean, there was no real recovery from that, you know. I guess they had given warnings to the